Hello everybody, welcome back to another exciting edition of Ed Puzzle Lecture Notes. We are done with Chapter 9, Nervous Tissue, and of course now we're on to Chapter 10, the nervous system, specifically the central nervous system. Alright, so what is the spinal cord? I think you guys kind of know what it is. You can see it right over here. It is a long, thin, tubular bundle of nerve tissue that extends from the lowest part of the brain, which is called the medulla oblongata, and it goes all the way down the vertebral canal. 31 spinal nerves branch off from the spinal cord to form your peripheral nervous system. So its function is pretty obvious. It's what communicates the signals from your peripheral nervous system to the brain, and from the brain to the peripheral nervous system. And it's enclosed within the vertebral column, so the bony vertebra, and it's also protected by these connective tissue called the meninges. And this basically says what I just said. Now the meninges, that's the membranes which cover both the brain and the spinal cord. Their function is to protect the brain and spinal cord. So location, obviously, they surround the spinal cord and the brain. So you have both cranial meninges, which surround the brain, which help protect it, and also the spinal meninges, which surround the spine and help protect it. And it's going to be the layers, the order of those layers, kind of like the order of the layers of the epidermis. That's one of the things you're going to need to know. And I think that's coming on the next slide. And I was right. All right, so the meninges. Different layers of the meninges. So the very most superficial, so this is the closest to the surface of the skin, is called the epidural space. And that's the space between the bony vertebra and the first layer of the meninges called the dura mater. And it's made of fat and connective tissue. So even though it's a space, there is fat and there is like blood vessels in there as well. And the next layer, we're going deeper. Remember, superficial is towards the surface or where your skin is at. And now we're going deeper from the epidural space. And below or deeper is called the dura mater. That's the outermost layer of the meninges. Tough. It's made of dense, irregular connective tissue. Will you need to know that? I doubt it. But might want to write it down just in case. Deeper or deep of the dura mater is the subdural space. So another space. You can kind of see like a little pattern here. So we have a space, we have dura mater, we have space, we're going to have arachnoid matter, then we have another space. But anyways, so this is the space between the dura mater and what's called the arachnoid matter. And what does it do? Not a whole lot as far as this course is concerned. But know that it is located in between the dura mater and the arachnoid matter. And of course, the next one, going deeper, getting away from the surface, going deeper inside the body, is the arachnoid matter. And it's called that because arachnoid, if you have arachnophobia, you're scared of spiders. Well, this kind of looks like spider webs if you look at it. It's a spider web-like arrangement of both collagen and elastic fibers. Well, you need to know what it's made of? I don't think so. It's been a year since we gave the test, but I don't think that's on the test. This one's going to be important. The next one, deeper or deep of the arachnoid matter, is the subarachnoid space. Now this one does have a particular important function. So this is between the pia mater and the arachnoid matter, and this is what contains the cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF, which is important for cushioning both the brain and spinal cord, and it also helps to nourish and get rid of waste and give things that the brain and spinal cord needs, like oxygen and glucose. And just deep of the subarachnoid space, you have a transparent membrane called the pia mater, and that is what is actually that adheres directly to the brain and spinal cord. So that's like a little membrane that is right against the nerve tissue of the brain and spinal cord. So definitely know the order of these. Epidural space, then you have the dura mater, subdural space, arachnoid mater, subarachnoid space, and finally the pia mater, which directly adheres to the brain and the spinal cord. And some diagrams of the spinal meninges over here. So that's of course the spinal cord. This would be a transverse plane of section. So on the very most superficial layer you have the dura mater. And not shown here, but even more superficial would be the epidural space, which would be just more superficial of the dura mater. These here are some of the spinal nerves, the 31 pairs that branch off from the spinal cord. Then remember you have the subdural space. It's not listed here, but that's going to be between the dura mater and the arachnoid mater. So here's the arachnoid mater. I know it doesn't look like a spider web right there, but it usually does if it's not like a drawing. And then deeper than that is going to be the subarachnoid space. Remember, that's what contains the cerebrospinal fluid, the subarachnoid space. And then the most deep layer, which adheres directly to the nerve tissue around the spinal cord and the brain also. It's the same thing over here with the cranial meninges, is the pia mater. All right, a little more additional information. I don't know if this is on the test or if this is gonna be a big part of this unit, but there's a thing called an epidural block, very common during labor, during childbirth, and that is a way to totally numb, so you lose the feeling in basically the lower half of your body. And this is where a needle is placed within the epidural space in the spinal cord. You can see down here in the lumbar section of the spinal cord. And an anesthetic, basically a painkiller, it does not allow your neurons to fire action potentials. So even though the lower part of your body is trying to send to your brain like, whoa, this really hurts, but those neurons, if they're unable to fire action potentials, that pain stimulus is not relayed to your brain. And not just the sensory information that is stopped or blocked by this anesthetic, but also the motor information is unable to go from the brain down to your legs. So not only do you not feel what's going on below, you're not also kind of paralyzed because the motor neurons are also unable to fire their action potentials. Another procedure that can be done in the same region of your body is called a spinal tap or a lumbar puncture. This also involves a needle. Now this is where they're going to insert that needle into the subarachnoid space to remove some cerebrospinal fluid. Now this is usually done to check for some sort of infection, and that's what's called meningitis, and that's an inflammation of the meninges. So they remove that cerebrospinal fluid from the subarachnoid space, and they're going to check it for things like glucose. If there's low glucose, that means there might be some cells like bacteria or possibly cancer, which is taking up that glucose to use for themselves. High protein levels to check for the bacteria themselves, or for like white blood cell count, because elevated white blood cells can be a sign as there's some sort of infection. And there's a couple reasons why you can have that infection. It could be from a virus, that would be viral meningitis. It could also be from a bacteria, of course that'd be bacterial meningitis. It could also be from a fungus, and they stick the needle between lumbar number 3 and number 4 from the back side or the posterior side. And the reason why they do that is because the spinal cord actually ends between lumbar number 1 and lumbar number 2. You can see that here. So this is the thoracic vertebra, then it goes to the lumbar, and then it's going to go to the sacral. So they do it down here because obviously since the spinal cord ended up here, you're not going to damage the spinal cord by checking the cerebrospinal fluid that low. Spinal cord gross anatomy are its general features. It's about 42 to 45 centimeters long, or about 16 to 18 inches. Extends from the brain to the second lumbar vertebra. And remember, it connects the brain with 31 pairs of peripheral nerves, which branch off from the spinal cord. Now, below the second lumbar, you have what's called the cauda equina. And that basically means horsetail, because after the second lumbar vertebra, that solid vertebral column branches off into what looks like kind of a horsetail. And those nerves go on to branch off and connect with like the bladder and your legs and your feet and stuff like that. Now remember, spinal nerves, once again, 31 pairs of nerves that branch off of the spinal cord. That's what makes up your peripheral nervous system, or the PNS. And some more spinal cord anatomy. So this is going to be the posterior, the back, and this is going to be the anterior, or the front. So you can see right here in the middle, which forms kind of like an H, this is the gray matter. That's made up of mostly synapses and cell bodies. And then around out here you have the white matter, and that's going to be made of the myelinated axons. So in the spinal cord, the white matter is on the outside and the gray matter is on the inside. It's going to be the reverse when it comes to the brain. And a couple more things you might need to know. You can see that sensory information enters your spinal cord through the dorsal, or the posterior side. And right here, this little lump right here, that's called the dorsal root ganglion, or the posterior root ganglion. Now remember, ganglia, that is a cluster of cell bodies located outside of the central nervous system. So that is a bunch of cell bodies located outside the spinal cord. And the sensory information is going to enter the spinal cord through the posterior, or the dorsal route, right through there. Now, if this was a reflex, like say you touch something hot, that sensory information would come through the dorsal root, come into the spinal cord, and then it would directly go to a motor neuron and come out through the anterior part of the spinal cord, and it will go directly to an effector, which will move your hand away from something that's hot. So this right here would be one of the 31 pairs of spinal nerves which branch off from the spinal column. Now something you can see right here, this is the central canal that runs through the whole length of the spinal cord and actually connects with the brain. And this also helps to circulate cerebrospinal fluid. So even the cerebrospinal fluid that's in the brain is also connected to the spinal cord through the central canal. And here's a transverse plane, or a transverse section of the spinal cord. A lot of this stuff I'm not going to go over because, like the spinous process of the vertebra right here, we go over that in the skeletal system. This ed puzzle is mainly about the meninges, so we're going to concentrate on that. So here you have the epidural space, so you can see the adipose, or the fat tissue in there. And you also have some blood vessels. Then you're going to have the dura mater, that tough, dense, irregular connective tissue, the outermost layer of the meninges. Then you're going to have the subdural space, not shown here. Then you have the arachnoid matter, and not really shown here that good. Then you remember you have the subarachnoid space, which contains the cerebrospinal fluid. Definitely remember that. Then you're going to have the pia mater, which is not really shown here either, but it's what directly adheres to the spinal cord itself. And our last slide. So how many nerves at each section of the vertebral column? Now remember, you do have the cranial nerves, which branch directly off the brain, but these are the spinal nerves, which branch off the spinal cord. Are you going to need to know exactly how many are in each region of the spinal cord? I don't think so, but if you do, I will let you know at a later date, but definitely put these in your notes. So in your neck, The first 8 pairs are going to be your cervical nerves. You're going to have to know these when we get to the skeletal system and the spring. So it's going to be the cervical vertebra as well. Then you have the thoracic nerves right here, T1 through T12. Moving down or inferior, you have the lumbar nerves right here, L1 through L5. And of course, at the very end, you have the coccygeal nerves, just one that comes off the very end. And obviously, if you add all this, so 8 plus 12 is 20, plus 5 is 25, plus another 5 is 30, plus 1 equals 31 spinal nerves, which branch off the spinal cord. All right, thank you very much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.